I have been working through the book of Job and looking at classic sections in the book of Job. And we now are at chapter 38, looking at the Hebrew, looking at the discourses of God from 38:1 to 42:6. After the sections of debate with his three friends, Job then is finally confronted by God. In coming to chapters 38, 42 to 6, the reader comes to the conclusion of the discussion. And what a conclusion it is. This section represents one of the most beautiful poetic developments anywhere on the theme of the greatness of God as seen in nature. Job's question as to why he is suffering is not answered. He is rather presented with the magnitude of God's greatness and told to trust and rely on his workings rather than attacking God for something beyond Job's sphere of understanding. While this section does not bring an intellectual answer to the why of Job's suffering, it does bring help to Job. Instead of attacking God's injustice or integrity in suffering, he is to realize that some things of life are impossible to comprehend. Such things are only known to the sovereign Creator. Two questions within the speeches set forth the emphasis of this concluding section. In 38 verse 2, it reads, "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge?" Again, in 42, it reads, "Shall he that reproves contend with the Almighty? He that argues with God, let him answer it." Thus Job is being challenged now by God for his questioning of God's integrity and his justice. The purpose of the two speeches of God, then, is to emphasize the amazing greatness of God's knowledge and wisdom in contrast to Job's ignorance. The form of the discussion is often in the form of questions, challenging Job to consider God's greatness in his creation and asking him if he, in his infinite wisdom, could do the same. Since Job can't answer God's working and knowledge, especially in the natural and animal worlds, he certainly cannot likewise answer in the spiritual world, especially of human suffering. So we begin with God's first speech to Job. This is found in chapter 38, 1 to 39, verse 30. In Yahweh's first speech, after intervening from the whirlwind, the Lord challenges Job's knowledge of creation, the creation of the earth, the sea, the bringing in of the morning, the extent of the sea, the source of light and darkness, snow and hail, wind and rain, dew and ice, the stars, the feeding of the lions and ravens, the habits of the wild goats, wild ass, wild ox, the ostrich, the horse, and the hawk and vulture are all beautifully discussed in poetic form, and Job is asked if he has the knowledge to understand these things about them. So we're going to begin with that introduction at verse 1. And I'll read the Hebrew and then work at the grammar, do a grammatical analysis inductively, followed then by running comments. So it reads, Vaya'an Adonai et Eyob, min ha'se'ara v'yomar, that is, and the Lord answered Job from the whirlwind and said, Vaya'an is from ana, to answer. It is the cow stem here, the cow imperfect, a third masculine singular from ana. Salamed Hay verb. So he answered Job from the whirlwind and said, Vayomer is a common expression that we see especially in Genesis over and over. Vayomer Elohim, and God said. It's a cow imperfect, third masculine singular from amar, with a vav conversive or a vav consecutive. Then we go on. Mizeh makshik etza v'milin beli da'ad. That is, who is this that causes counsel to be darkened by words without knowledge? Notice the question that God is asking Job. Who is this? Rhetorical questions. And then makshik is from chashak, to dark, to make dark, or to be dark. And here we have a hifil participle, masculine singular from chashak. And so who is this that causes counsel to be dark, or that causes the darkening of counsel by words without knowledge? In other words, words that really are without understanding, without true knowledge. Literally, like we had said, who is this who darkens counsel? The Lord begins his first speech then with a question put to Job, which really stands as a rebuke against his attack on divine providence. The text then continues in verse 3. Azar now chegever chalatzecha ve'esh halacha v'chodi'eni. That is, gird up now as a man your loins, and I will ask you, and you declare to me, or cause me to understand. Notice we have azar. It's a cow imperative, a masculine singular from azar. So gird up now, the Lord is saying, your loins as a man. And halatzecha is the word loin from halatz. It's a dual form in the Hebrew. So gird up your loins, and here we have a pronominal suffix with the noun chalatz, second masculine singular, and I will demand of you, or I will ask you, and declare to me. Notice, let me ask you. Esh alacha, from sha'al, to ask. Here we have the cow imperfect, first common singular from sha'al, with a vav with a vav consecutive, or a vav, just a connective, I should say. It's a vav connective, not a consecutive here, but just a simple vav connective. And I will ask you, v'chol di'eni, and declare to me, or cause me to know. Here we have the root yada. It's a hifil imperative masculine singular with the pronominal suffix in the eni, the e, first person personal pronoun, pronominal suffix. And notice this stem historically was a one or a pei vav stem, vada, and when you have it historically in its development, it would have been how di'eni becoming ho di'eni. The pathak and the vav came together forming a cholam vav in this hifil imperative here. So I will ask, or let me ask you, and declare to me, tell me my questions that I have. So then, following this imperfect, I would see this as adjussive. Then we move on. Efo hayita beyosdi aretz haged im yadata vina. That is, where were you when I laid the foundation, or when I founded the earth? I declare, if you have understanding, or if you know understanding, tell me. Again, this is ironic. Where were you? Hayita is the cow perfect, second masculine singular from haya, lamed hey root, historically a final yod root, and the yod is reappearing here. So where were you when I laid the foundation? Notice be yosti is from yasad, to put a foundation. And here we have a cow infinitive construct with the pronominal suffix in the e, first person singular. So where were you when I laid the foundation? Haged im yadata vina. That is, tell me, declare to me. Here we have a hifil imperative masculine singular from nagad, a pei noon verb where the noon has assimilated into the gimel by progressive assimilation. So hanged became hagid. So declare, if you know understanding. Yadata as the cow perfect, second masculine singular from yada. So tell me if you have understanding to this question. So as I think about commenting on these particular verses, notice Job is admonished in verse 3 to prepare himself for action. Gird up, as God is ready to interrogate him and demand an answer from Job. Job's wish to meet God in contest has now come to pass. Remember in chapter 13, verse 22, he wanted to meet God, and now this has happened. So now, from verses 4 to 7, Yahweh begins by showing Job his ignorance, first of all, of creation. And in verse 4, as we just read, Job is asked where he was when God laid the earth's foundation. The questions addressed to Job are to illustrate his ignorance and presumption in criticizing the Lord's working. Where were you, Job, when that happened? So then we move on to verse 5. Misam mimadeha ki teda. Oh, Minata aleha kav. Who placed its measures for or if you know? A question. Who placed the measures of the earth if you know, Job? I mean, if you are so uh, knowledgeable, who accomplished that? And the word memad means measurement here. So who was it that placed the measures of the earth? Here we have the third feminine singular pronominal suffix to that noun, and it's a noun in plural construct with ha, if you know. Notice teda is from yada, to know. Historically, it was a one vav form, as we've seen in the one above, from vada, and the vav dropped out. And so we have compensatory lengthening under the tav from a hirig to a serig. So who determined its measures, if you know? Or who has stretched out upon it a line, or the line upon it? Notice nata is just your cow perfect third masculine singular, meaning to stretch out. So again, who has measured it? Who stretched out the line for its definition of measurement, we could say. And so again, as we look at this question in verse 5, the Lord is reasoning. What about the earth's dimension and size? Was it the reason, is reasoning the Lord, was it something that you were able to determine? It certainly wasn't Job. So who was it? And of course, he's implying clearly that only the Lord, only God, was able to do that. So then we go to verse 6. And by the way, in these verses, he's looking at creation and asking Job about creation. So in verse 6, Alma Adanecha hot ba'u, omi yara even pinata. Whereupon were its foundations fastened? Notice here after the question, upon what? Its foundations. Were they fastened, or have they been fashioned? Here we have the root is tava, meaning to fashion, and basically it means to sink down or to cause them to be settled. Here we have a hofal stem from tava, to sink down or to be settled. So where were you when its foundations were sunk down or were fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone, or the stone of its corner, literally? Mi yara even pinata. Notice yara here means to lay down, or to cast, to throw down. So where were you, Job, when the foundations were fastened and the cornerstone, or the stone of its corner, was thrown down? Notice yara, we can actually render it, who laid the stone of its corner. Yara is just your cow perfect third masculine singular from yara, meaning to set, lay in the sense to set, or to set down. We could say the stone of its corner. Pina is corner, and it's in construct with the pronominal suffix, third feminine singular. And here we have two nouns in construct, the stone of its corner, and hence its cornerstone. And then verse 7 reads, B'ran yachad kochavei boker v'yarihu kol b'nei Elohim. When the morning stars, the stars of the morning literally sang together or broke out in like a jubilant song together. Where were you? Like when they shouted together or raised a voice in praise, sort of like in applause. They shouted together. So when that happened, where were you when they sang? We could render this possibly as sang as well, but it's interesting. Ibn Ezra in the Sonsino Bible, medieval Jewish commentator on page 197 on Job, the stars were, so to speak, the first choir at the act of creation. The morning stars are the brightest and most glorious, heralding the earth as it rose into existence at the first dawn. And so it's interesting to think about the morning stars as they're singing. Where were you, Job? Is the question again. And when all the sons of God shouted for joy, Vayarihu kol b'nei Elohim. Notice Vayarihu is from Ruah, to shout in joyful applause. All the sons of God would refer to the angels shouting when God laid the foundation of the earth. Where were you? Is God's question to Job. It is interesting here, as we've seen in verse 6, the foundations were the sockets of the earth in which they were fast. The earth was fastened. And who was it then that did that and also laid the cornerstone? In poetic language, the author then is picturing the earth resting on pillars and a large cornerstone which sets the direction of an edifice as being first laid by the Lord to set the direction of the earth. Where were you at that time? Is God's question to Job. It's interesting. In the New Testament, the chief cornerstone of the New Testament building, the church, is Jesus Christ, according to the New Testament, who sets the direction of the building, the church. And so it's interesting. The cornerstone has its application in that sense in New Testament writing. But then we come looking at verse 7, concerning the morning stars, we announced that again God asked where he was when the stars announced the dawn, and they first sung for joy at the completion of the earth's creation. In other words, the stars, I should say, announced the dawn, the morning stars. And Job is alluding to that imagery. Where were you, Job? God is asking the question. Alas, also, the sons of God are angels, joined in this triumphant song as they praise God for his completed creation. And all the way through here, God is asking Job, where were you? And if you can't understand this, then how can you understand why the righteous suffer. But at any rate, I'm going to stop there. And then at verse 11, or verse 8 to 11, we'll move on to talk about how the Lord not only created the earth, but also set a boundary for the ocean waters as well. So we'll get into that on the next video. Thank you. I hope you can follow along. Have your Hebrew Bible open and follow along, working at your grammar as well, and at the sort of the commentary, and I'm trying to understand the text. Thank you. I've enjoyed this. Thank you very much.